All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the first basement bodybuilding tier list. Of course, we had to start with biceps. I do plan on going through probably every major muscle group, or at least most of them. I'm not going to be pumping these out like crazy, but if it gets good feedback and you want to see more, I'll obviously keep them in mind to keep doing them. It's just a matter of trying to kind of pace them out so it doesn't take over the rest of the content that I plan on making. So, with that being said, a couple things to go over real quick. So, this tier list is going to be lifts that I'm very familiar with. I didn't have like kind of random lifts like a banded curl or like kind of funky ring variations or anything. No disrespect to those lifts, but I'm not entirely experienced with them and they're not very conventional. So what I like to do is pick more conventional lifts, stuff that I'm more familiar with, stuff that's more popular, and then talk about the variations that I think are best and how to optimize these lifts, which ones are worth doing, which ones are not worth doing, and which ones you should absolutely be prioritizing. Tier lists, while they can be a little bit gimmicky, they just provide such a good opportunity to talk exercise selection, which is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated topics in the fitness industry. There's a lot of people that will talk about laundry lists of lifts that you need to do to target every little area from each muscle. But aside from that, I think exercise selection, like when people say you can do whatever lift you want and all the results are going to be the same, I heavily disagree with that. And I think I can provide a good case for that with good context in these tier lists. So I think there is a lot of value there. With that being said, I did want to give a shout out to Barbell Apparel and let you guys know they're having their summer sale. So the way this works, if you buy 3 items, so if you put 3 items in your cart, one of them is going to be free. So you basically pay for two, you get a third for free. This applies to shirts and shorts. So summer sale, obviously shirts and shorts makes the most sense. The ultralight tech tee, my go-to shirts. That's what you see me wearing in my lifting vlogs. The fit is just immaculate. It's literally the best fitting shirt I've ever worn, and that's why I wear them for every single lift that I do. I'm not even exaggerating. The covert shorts are sweet too. I love to wear these just either like around the house. They're like comfy chino type shorts, but they're kind of a stretchy material. I'm actually wearing them now. Not planned, but I just like them. They're great for outdoor stuff too. So like camping, hiking, that kind of stuff. Perfect material. They got good pockets and some good structure without being too restrictive. So if you want to see any of those items, check out the link in my description. You can shop my collection, get yourself some good stuff, some free stuff, and support the channel. In the meantime, I also did want to give a shout out to Boost Camp, the other channel sponsor. You can check my free upper lower program. If you already have the app and have premium, you can see my push pull legs push pull. And then real quick, a very rare occasion on this channel, I actually do have a couple coaching spots open. So if you have any questions or if you're interested, just send me an email and we can kind of go from there. So let's get into this tier list. Let's see if I can even find the right tab to open. Okay, there we go. So we've got a bicep tier list. Of course, this ad's going to be in the way the whole time. It is what it is. So got a handful of lifts down here. What we've got first is the strict dumbbell curl. So the strict dumbbell curl. What is good about this lift? What is bad about this lift? So this one is obviously, it's a very normal piece of equipment. It's a dumbbell. Everyone uses dumbbells. That's kind of the default for bicep training in the first place. But not a whole ton of people do strict curls, and not a lot of people do them in the strict fashion that I'm doing here with my upper arm on the rack post. So there's pros and cons to any lift. And when I say pros and cons, take that with, I don't take that too literally. It's more so just things that the lift does really well, and maybe a few key areas that the lift maybe doesn't train as well. A few things that just are missed that might need to be made up in other variations. So I hate pros and cons. I don't know, kind of oversimplifies like the strengths and weaknesses, I guess, of each lift. So this lift, obviously, these are all stick figures, and then you've got me over here. I couldn't find this lift for my life on Google Images because it's not very popular, as I stated already. So this lift, there are a bunch of good things about it. One, it's strict. So when I say it's strict, I'm not talking about you choosing to make the lift strict. I'm talking about there's support behind your upper arm. So you don't have to worry about stability being the limiting factor of your force output. So all you have to do is just curl. It has good progression potential since the lift isn't going to change as you get stronger and start to use heavier weight. The leverages don't change. It's just going to be something that you can add weight on pretty regularly throughout your whole lifting career. Since it's a short biased lift, that is kind of one of the drawbacks. But since it's short biased and since it's very strict, I find this is probably the perfect opportunity to use lengthened partials in your training. I'm not a huge fan of just doing partial reps, although I do kind of like to do them on some short bias lifts beyond failure. This is probably just the perfect lift to do it on, since you can keep it nice and stable, get a very high force output, and really just tax the whole range of motion. On these, you'll find that you can kind of get right to parallel, so right beyond 90 degrees of elbow flexion. And then your range of motion just shrinks ever so slightly each rep, just because it's short bias and there's really no clear lockout. And then from there, you can just keep going and just keep applying as much force as you can. And then eventually your arm just won't be moving very much at all. And your biceps will feel absolutely fried. The sensations are very high in this lift. It's a very good lift. You don't have to overthink it. It's very straightforward. The strength potential is fairly low, but the progression potential is excellent because you can add weight forever and the lift doesn't change. So it's not length and biased. It is still stable. So it has some good, some quote unquote bad, I guess. It can't go quite in the S tier, but this is one of the best non-length and biased lifts, in my opinion. You can also do these with a cable if you prefer. It doesn't really matter that much. So these are going to go in A tier as the first one for today. So up next, you've got cable curls. So cable curls, and this there's some, I guess, some crossover between some lifts, like a cable curl versus a barbell curl. The difference really isn't that big. So you're going to see me kind of skim over some of these lifts and just say, like, all right, this is essentially the same as this lift. It's just on a barbell versus a cable. So a cable curl, a lot of people think that this is going to be like a consistent flat resistance profile with constant tension. That's not how cables work. I can expand more on this in another video, but basically cables function the same way a dumbbell does. So when people say, well, a dumbbell or a barbell, it has kind of an arcing resistance profile. And yeah, you're not wrong. But when people say that a cable doesn't, and it has a flat resistance profile because the weight just goes up and down, you have to realize that gravity doesn't change in relation to the dumbbell. The dumbbell, when you're doing a dumbbell curl, is always going to want to go directly down. It's the dumbbell in relation to your elbow. It's the same thing with the cable. Even though the weight stacks are just going vertical up and down the whole time, the distance from the load, so the bar in your hand to your elbow, horizontally or horizontal to wherever the cable origin is set, that's what's going to dictate the resistance profile. So cable curls, they are very comparable to barbell curls or easy bar curls, depending on your attachment. They are stable if you're doing them with a bar attachment that is connected on both sides. So that's a pro. They do feel quite good, I think, because of the variety of attachments. So you can really just customize them more than you could a barbell curl or something like that. With that said, they are short biased, especially if you're just having the cable in front of you like this. It gets a little bit tricky because even to make it just mid-range biased, or at least the same resistance profile as a barbell curl, you have to stand super close to the cable. I find that more often than not, people stand back a little bit, and that just makes it more short biased. So I'm going to put cable curl in B tier. It's a good lift, and B tier isn't bad at all. I still do cable curls, but just because a lift isn't S tier doesn't mean you can't do it. It just might not be something you want to rely on for just your like prime mover for your biceps. So now we're going to get into some preacher curl variations. Actually, it looks like these didn't quite save on me, so I might have to skip around a little bit. So where are preacher curls? All right, here we go. So preacher curls, this will be the lift that I do next. These can be done with an easy bar or a barbell. The bar that you use doesn't matter that much in terms of the actual stimulus you have. It's more so just finding either what you prefer or what's more comfortable. The mechanics of the lift are what's going to be key here. So preacher curl, talked about these a bazillion times on the channel. These are a great lift because one, they're very stable, and two, they are length and biased. So this can allow you to put most tension on the bicep in a stretch in the lengthened position. It's not a full stretch since your elbow is not behind you, but your bicep is just about nearly all the way lengthened when peak tension occurs in this lift. So it's very good for that reason. It's also stable since you have elbow support. So makes it very consistent to track. It allows for a very high force output since tension can't really leak. It's a true isolation lift where if you try and cheat at all, there's not not really anywhere tension can leak, since your elbows are making contact on that pad, versus like a barbell curl or a cable curl. You can shift your entire body around. Tension can leak through anywhere, even like your knees or your hips, for example, where it just can't on a preacher curl. Of course, you can kind of change the angle of your upper arm by leaning forwards or back a little bit, but it's just not enough to warrant a knock on the lift at all. I really can't think of any particular downsides for this lift. The only things I'd say is, if you're prone to maybe like elbow weakness overall, like if you're not trained in a lengthened position, it might require some building up of strength and size, probably down in that distal region of the bicep, or at least some tendon strength. So it might take a little bit of like loading time to kind of build that lift up. This can be an issue in some people, but I'd say the injuries that you see of people tearing their biceps on preacher curls are just from bad programming and bad decisions. It's probably going to be someone on PEDs, someone that just goes way too heavy, someone that maxes out and isn't trained for it, or someone that just hops into preacher curls for the first time and goes heavier than they can handle, or just goes much harder than they can handle when they first start this movement. Because a lot of the time in a regular old training program that you'll see on anyone in a commercial gym, the biceps rarely get trained in a lengthened position. So once you can kind of adapt to that, it becomes a really good lift. And this is truly the lift that gave me 18-inch arms. Yeah, it absolutely is. So that is going to go in A tier, because I have to put it there first so I can drag it all the way up to S tier. So there's preacher curls. Let's talk about some other preacher curl variations. So up next, where did they go? Okay. All right, here we go. So up next, I'm going to talk about this Arsenal preacher curl machine. It's not the most common machine, but I imagine it will become more popular over time, because I think Arsenal is a slowly but surely growing gym equipment manufacturer. I'm starting to see it a little bit more and more, and I absolutely love their equipment. This is the machine that I use in the commercial gym. It resembles a preacher curl, but your elbows are set up just a little bit higher. So it's more of like a 90-degree bench instead of 45 degrees. It doesn't matter because it's a machine, and it's not, it's engineered to still kind of match the resistance profile of a preacher curl. The cool thing about this is it's just a tad bit more stable. Yeah, I find it to be a little bit more comfortable, because the pad that you rest your elbows on also has a back, so it's like chest support too. It just feels a little bit more natural, I find. And I do find it's even a little bit more lengthened biased than a preacher curl. And it sounds a little bit crazy, but to get fully lengthened biased, you have to have your arm up at 90 degrees like this, in basically curl from there. So this machine is close to that. It's not quite, due to the mechanics of the machine. It's not like a full like table curl like an arm wrestler would do, but it's super grindable, because as you get to failure, you can actually shift back just a little bit, and it makes it a little bit easier. So it's an excellent machine. I would also put this in the S tier. There we go. So you can see that up there behind that little ad. So next up, what we've got, I'm going to do this one here. This is the Prime Preacher Curl machine. So this machine is excellent because you pick your resistance profile. A regular preacher curl or the Arsenal preacher curl, the resistance profile is already set. It's going to be very difficult at the bottom and super easy at the top, to where there's really no tension at the top. So what this does is it allows you to manipulate that resistance profile very easily. So you can see these pegs on the side of the machine. Instead of just having one place where you load up the plates, or just a pin that you have like a non-adjustable cam for, basically what this does is it arcs as you, that looked horrible, but basically it arcs as you curl. So if you were to load the plates all the way on this bottom pin down here, I don't know if you can really see it. If you were to load the plates here, they would start about here, and then they would arc up and kind of stop right about here. So it's about 90 degrees worth of travel. So from here, if the plate's just traveling parallel to the ground, you're really not moving a whole ton of weight. So it's very similar to just doing like a standing barbell curl. It's very easy to get the bar moving at first, and then it gets quite hard as you approach 90 degrees. So this would be short bias, because it's very light at the bottom and then much harder as you kind of get to that peak contraction. You can also set it on this middle peg here. And essentially what this does is it just makes it a mid-range bias lift. So what you'll do is you'll start below peak resistance. So it's a little bit easier. As you get about halfway up, you get to peak resistance. And then from there, it gets easier as you start to lock out. So perfect example of a mid-range bias lift. Another cool thing you can do here is just make it length and biased. And this is essentially what a preacher curl, that Arsenal curl, is going to do if you load the plates up on this top peg here. So what you can do here is basically make it most challenging at the bottom, and then it gets much easier as it arcs up to the top. And eventually you're going parallel to the floor basically again, but now it's at the top in the contraction instead of the bottom. So it's very basic physics as long as you kind of try and wrap your head around it. It's pretty straightforward. Anyone can really understand this stuff. So the cool thing about this, if you think outside the box just a little bit, you can mix and match. So you can put some of your weight on the top, some on the middle. You can put half on the top, half on the middle, some on the bottom. You can disperse it evenly. It is basically just an excellent machine preacher curl, which does have a little bit of added stability, not enough for me to like make it change tiers or anything. The stability on a regular preacher curl with a free weight is totally fine. There's no issue there whatsoever, but it does have added variety, so you couldn't give it a knock. So I'm going to put this in S tier as well. So we've got one more preacher curl machine. Let's hop into this one. So this is the hammer strength preacher curl machine. There's a handful of companies that make a very similar model to this. So I just picked hammer strength because it's the most popular. So what you're going to see here looks like a regular old preacher curl machine. And then you load your plates on this little peg down here. So the hammer strength preacher curl machine, a lot of people in the comments and even a few of my clients kind of ask these questions like, well, shouldn't I just do the hammer strength machine or like the plate loaded machine instead because it's a little bit more stable? And at first glance, it seems like a pretty good option. There's one problem though. This machine is only short biased. So what you'll notice, and this is for basically all hammer strength machines, by the way, they're short biased machines. So that's one thing to take into account. When you load the plates at the bottom, you're below the axis. So the axis is going to be right up here, kind of around elbow level. And if the plates are down kind of by your ankles, that means as you curl and the lever comes up, you're coming up to just roughly parallel with the axis. So peak resistance is going to be at the top in the contraction, and it gets harder as you curl and easier the more you lengthen your bicep. And if you're looking for probably where the biceps have best leverage and where muscles are generally going to grow best, plus having a resistance profile with a clear lockout where you can standardize your performance, it's hard to give this a good grade. So while it has its pros, like it's stable, you can add weight forever, like you can any other lift, basically, and it looks cool. I mean, I have a hard time putting that high, so I'm going to put this plate loaded preacher curl. I'm going to put it in C tier. D tier feels a little harsh because there's some lifts that are just objectively bad, and this does have some good things going for it. But the short bias it knocks it down just a little bit. And the reason for that is because not only is it short biased in terms of resistance profile, it's short biased in terms of the strength curve too, because your biceps are going to be weaker in the peak contraction than they are going to be in the bottom. So that's a little bit more nitpicky, but C tier feels appropriate for this. Up next, we've got just a standard good old barbell curl. Nope, here she is. Okay. So barbell curl and easy bar curl. I'm going to put these next to each other because they're essentially the same thing. So these are kind of going to be grouped together. A barbell curl. This is the classic like compound type barbell lifts for the biceps, where you can just treat it like a squat, bench, deadlift and add weight forever, progressively overload, and your biceps will end up massive. So if you look at it just on paper, that makes sense. But in practice, when you get into like the mechanics of this lift, isolation lifts simply just don't work the same way as compounds simply because of biomechanics. So when you take something like a barbell bench press, the lift doesn't change as you get stronger because it's very stable and you're just pressing basically directly up and down with a little bit of a vertical slant on it. So, or almost vertical slant. That doesn't really make sense. But basically with the barbell curl, now you're factoring in your center of mass changing as the lift goes. So instead of a squat where you go up and down, a deadlift where you go up and down, a bench where you go up and down, a barbell curl, you go out and around. So with this lift, if you're an 150-pound person and you're curling 50 pounds, that's fine. You're curling a third of your body weight. It's just not enough to really affect the lift in terms of stability, to where your body has to kind of compensate by like shifting around your elbows or leaning back to fix your center of mass to make it a little bit more stable. But if you, let's say you go on a nice bulk, you get a lot stronger. Maybe you're an intermediate now. Let's say you're curling 105 pounds, but you weigh 175 now. Now you're curling over half of your body weight. You're probably curling close to 2/3 of your body weight. And the problem with this is now this has a bigger change on your center of mass. So when the barbell is resting on your thighs and your arms are fully extended, you can sit there all day until your grip gives out. But now when you're at peak resistance, so your arms are at 90 degrees, the barbell's a forearm's distance in front of you. And that's going to play a pretty big role in changing your center of mass. So now you have to find a way to compensate for that before the barbell starts to slowly pull you forwards. So you have to lean back. And that's why you can try and do barbell curls strict forever, but eventually you just simply can't do them strict, or you're just going to fall forwards. And that starts to become an issue as your barbell curl weight catches up to your own body weight. So it's a good lift specifically for beginners. It's decent for intermediates too. Once you're advanced, like I don't even do them at all. I would do them as like a finisher, like a second or third lift after I've done like my regular preacher curls, which stay the same as strong as you get. Uh, I can't say it's that great of a lift, though. Forever, the progressive overload potential, contrary to popular belief, is not that good. It's simply an overrated lift. The easy bar curl is the same thing. It has a little bit more freedom for your wrist to change, but that doesn't change the stimulus. That's more so just avoiding certain little things that might hold you back. So it's more so about what good things does this lift offer, then how can we avoid like little nitpicky details like wrist positioning and stuff, since that doesn't play a role in stimulus aside from avoiding injury. So barbell curl, not to mention these lifts are short bias too. Barbell curl, I would put in, it's tough to say B or C tier. I put cable curls in B tier, so I have to put the barbell and the easy bar curl in B tier as well. These are probably lower in the B tier. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to rank them in order, though. So up next, we've got myself doing some concentration curls. I had a black and white camera this day for whatever reason, but that's all besides the point. So basically a concentration curl. This is kind of the epitome of, it's not so much the lift, it's how you do the lift, because there's a bunch of different ways to do a concentration curl. If you have a big chunky dumbbell like I have here, that's a giant Olympic adjustable dumbbell, and you're using horrible technique, yeah, it's not a lift I would do. But if you have maybe more compact dumbbells, you have your legs set up in a position where you can kind of put your upper arm at the perfect angle and you have a way to keep it stable, now it becomes a really good lift. So this lift, it could be D tier, it could be A tier. It depends on how you execute it. And that's the tough thing about rating a lift like this. But I would say if you're using the ideal technique, so in my opinion, the ideal technique would be placing your elbow just inside your thigh. So not placing your forearm on top of your thigh, you're placing your elbow on the inside. And if you can tilt your shoulder back just a little bit, it almost becomes like a mild version of a preacher curl. So it becomes a little bit more lengthened by it. Still kind of a lengthened to mid-range, like hybrid lift, I would say. It would be tough to get your elbow or your upper arm at 45 degrees or beyond like a preacher curl, but kind of like a 60 to 75 degree angle. That's pretty realistic for this lift, and it's going to be fairly easy to maintain since it's not that extreme. And mobility-wise, it should be totally fine. So I'd say if you do these properly, it's not as good as a preacher curl. It's not as strict. Obviously, as a preacher curl, it's not as stable is probably a better way to put it, but it's still a very good lift. It is unilateral, which isn't my preference. It just takes more time. And then, of course, it isn't as strict. Like you can supinate or pronate more as you go. You can kind of change the angle of your forearm, which maybe recruits the brachialis a little bit more or less, bicep a little bit more or less. So it's not ideal, but it is pretty good. I would put this in. This is another lift where it's kind of on the fence between B and C tier. I'm going to go ahead. I think, and for some, I don't know if you guys can see that, but it just like didn't drag. So I probably needed just one more. Yeah, I probably needed one more tier on here, but yeah, either way, yeah, B tier. It's an appropriate tier. I would say it's an appropriate tier. So up next, what we've got, this is the conventional deadlift. And you might be like, What are you talking about, Mr. Basement? But little do you young lifters know, this was very popular when I was getting into lifting, because the deadlift would grow your biceps just because you're holding the bar and your biceps have to work just a little bit isometrically, but you're using super heavy weights. That will grow the crap out of your biceps. That logic doesn't really hold up when you really think about it, but it sounds, when people speak about that like it's the absolute truth, you start to believe it a little bit. So then you're not as worried about doing your curls at the end of your session, since your biceps already handled 600 pounds on a deadlift earlier that session. So you're not really worried about going hard on curls. They're an accessory lift anyways. And you did your squats too, and your squats boost your own growth hormone, which will grow every other muscle in your body more than curls ever would. So the conventional deadlift, I'd probably put these in D tier, because all of that's BS. Up next, I'm terribly blind, guys. I'm sorry. Okay, the waiter curl. So this one, this lift, again, like I said with the concentration curl, it depends on your technique. I would say your technique it's everyone's is kind of going to be the same, but I'd say it's totally occupation dependent for this one. So if it's appropriate for your job, then I say go for it. It could just really help you bring over super small trays that do happen to be very heavy. But then again, if you're not working in the food service industry, it's like, realistically, like, when are you ever going to have to do this? It's just not functional for you. So I would say this lift is like it it's kind of fine. Like it's the most gimmicky thing you could really think of. And even just looking at it, like seeing a stick figure with the muscle highlighted, like someone's taking it seriously, it makes me laugh. It's hard to look at that and take it seriously. But it really isn't just a terrible lift. It's hard. I'm gonna have to put it in D tier just because it is what it is, and you're not really gonna be able to do this comfortably for very long. But if you can do it comfortably, I don't see why it's any worse than like just a close grip barbell curl. So I don't know. I'll throw this in D tier, obviously above deadlifts. I guess I'll rank this one since I'm already here. Next, we've got Bayesian curls. These are actually a very popular lift. I find people absolutely love them. I think there's something about the stretch that people just really like. I'm not too huge on the stretch. I think it's useful to get if it's an appropriate time. But I see very often people go for a stretch on lifts where it's just entirely unnecessary. Like if there's not a whole ton of tension in the stretch, there's really no point in going for a deep stretch anyways. That's a little bit besides the point of Bayesian curls, but I think just talking about the stretch and how popular and trendy it is in recent years, I think it gets a little bit overrated. It definitely gets conflated with training in longer lengths overall and having peak tension at a longer muscle length. But with that being said, Bayesian curls, they're still a fine lift. It puts your bicep in a stretch by placing your elbow behind your torso. And then from there, it's kind of like a mid-range bias lift, similar to any other free weight curl that you're doing, just standing up like a dumbbell or barbell curl. So it's a totally fine lift. Trains the muscle at a generally longer length than a barbell or a dumbbell would. The resistance profile is going to be the same, but the muscle length, again, is just a little bit longer. Again, these aren't the most stable lift because obviously you're pulling from behind you. So I find that the heavier you go and the stronger you get, it does get kind of awkward to set up. So the progression potential isn't that great. These I see as a very good like secondary lift to whatever preacher curl variation you prefer. So I would put these in the E tier. These are going to be a little bit better than these options here, but not quite as good as a preacher curl or a genuinely good preacher curl machine with solid mechanics. In the same tier as the strict dumbbell curls, where you can do some length and partials after. Good lift, very good lift, not excellent. Up next, we've got alternating and supinating dumbbell curls. So these are going to be a little bit unique. So these are going to be done unilaterally or best done unilaterally. So what you can do here is, since you're doing one side at a time, it doesn't affect your center of mass as much. So if you're curling 120 pounds and you're a 200-pound person, that feels super awkward. But if you can cut that in half and you can do alternating dumbbell curls with 60 pounds, and by the time let's say your first rep is done with your right arm, by the time that's down, now you're just starting your left arm. So at all times, there's only 60 pounds max in front of you. And to add to this, you now have an extra 60 pounds next to your center of mass, which can help stabilize you even more. So now you weigh 260 basically, and you're only curling 60 pounds in front of your body. So that's another cool thing. And that's why a lot of people like to do these alternating. And some people are like, oh, well, yeah, I don't know why I do it alternating. I used to be like that. I'd be like, well, for whatever reason, it just like feels better. Like I can't explain it, but it just feels better. It doesn't make any sense that it should, but it does. And that's why. And that's why I love to talk about resistance profiles and mechanics so much on this channel, is because I think it's something that just gets left out of so many talking points. And people kind of like know things but don't actually understand them, so they can't really apply something they learned in one situation to other situations, and it holds people back from truly understanding lifting, in my opinion. So alternating dumbbell curls, they're more stable than an easy bar or a barbell curl, or just a dumbbell curl that you do bilaterally. They do train supination decently well. Obviously, it's not a direct supination like you could do with like a cable and an actual supination tool, or attachment. I guess I don't know why I said tool. So it's still decent. You can cheat a little bit as needed, and you don't have to worry about stability here. So these aren't the best it gets because they're still short bias, but they have a lot of pros that I do think make it a great lift. For that reason, I'm going to put them in the A tier. Sorry about these ads, guys, by the way. Up next, we've got the dumbbell preacher curl. So again, one little more preacher curl variation because I had to include it. So dumbbell preacher curls. These are only something I would do if I don't have access to a regular preacher curl station. So if you're a home gym guy with a barbell, rings, adjustable dumbbells, and adjustable bench, this is an excellent option. The drawbacks to this over a barbell preacher curl is it's less stable. So your forearm can shift around side to side. I find this happens a lot of the time where guys kind of like lean over and their elbow kind of digs in more towards the center and the dumbbell falls outwards a little bit, just like this. So it becomes a little bit of a funky movement. It's hard to say how much that matters, but I imagine it's probably not a deal breaker, but there's no way that's as good as something more stable like a preacher curl, since you are shifting away from peak tension just a little bit. So I would say it's still a great option, and if it's the best option you have available, you have to do it, in my personal recommendation. But if you have access to a regular preacher curl machine and you don't have any wrist pain from using an easy bar or a straight bar, I would do that instead. But this is still going to be a great option to train the biceps in a lengthened position. Probably not quite on the same level as the other variations. It's still a very, very good lift, but you can't put everything in S tier. If it has a little bit of a drawback, it's still A tier. That doesn't mean it's like a bad lift or like totally inferior, but a tier list is so you can have a true ranking. And look at this. We've got 3, 4, 4, 1, 2. Like, this is how a tier list should be, in my opinion. So up next, we've got spider curls. This cat's doing them a little funky. His elbows are up super high. The proper way to do a true spider curl would just be to drop your armpits onto that corner of the pad. So the spider curl, you might say, well, it's the exact same as this strict dumbbell curl here. What's the difference? It might be a little bit more stable since it's a barbell instead of dumbbell. My counter to this is if you look at the body positioning, you place your elbow farther in front of you. So a lift that's already short biased in terms of resistance profile, you're now placing your bicep in an even shorter position to start. So when you're on a spider curl station, your elbows are at least 45 degrees in front of your torso. So it makes it super short biased. It's still a very good lift, but you know what this is comparable to? This is very comparable to this lift here. So they're similar, and you might be saying this list is super nitpicky since there's really not much of a difference between something like this and then these two lifts here, but there's just these little upsides and little downsides that make a pretty big difference in bicep training, because after all, it's bicep training. It's just a muscle that doesn't have a whole ton of functions. It's a pretty straightforward muscle to train, as long as you understand what you're doing, and those are the things that I try and teach on this channel. So up next, what we've got is a strict standing barbell curl. So a strict standing barbell curl. Well, this is just so similar to so many other lifts on here. And the cool thing about this is it takes some kind of pros of some lifts, but it has its own little con that not a whole lot of people think about. So with a strict barbell curl, what you're doing here is you're keeping your back up against the wall and your elbows can stay pinned. So your elbows and your up arms can stay pinned to the wall. That's what this guy is doing right here. You can also do them competitive strict curl style where you go super narrow grip with an easy bar. You raise your elbows like a little bit of a front raise like this. And I would say just from like a resistance profile perspective, that makes a little bit more sense in terms of just standardization. That also makes a little bit more sense. The latter, not the former there. And then what I would say to this is the con here is if you're raising your elbows a bunch, again, it does put your bicep in a super short position without really lengthening it that much with a whole ton of tension. And like you could do lengthen partials in the bottom of these two lifts where your elbows are or your biceps are in a very short position to start, or even this lift where they're just kind of relaxed by your side in a mid position and do some partials beyond failure here. The problem with this is your thighs are going to be in the way or the plates are going to be in the way from the barbell. So with a strict barbell curl, very hard to do longer length partials. It's still a very good lift. This is the perfect lift to put in right into B tier. And within each tier, you are going to have different ranks too. But I would say this is going to be a little bit better than these two because your elbow is right by your side. It's not in front of you, and it's the same resistance profile. And then it's also very similar to this, but with the dumbbell curl, you can actually do some fully lengthened partials at the bottom and really fatigue that range of motion. And this would block you. So this is right in the middle. And if you're just looking at the context of the tier list, I think this is an appropriate ranking. B tier for the strict barbell curl. Up next, we've got incline dumbbell curls. Incline dumbbell curls are they're very similar to a Bayesian curl, but they're more stable. So they are a little bit better than a Bayesian curl, in my opinion. You can get a very good stretch on the biceps here. It's still about a mid-range resistance profile. It's not going to be most challenging at the bottom and getting easier as you come up. As you curl, it's going to get harder and harder until your arms get to parallel with the ground, your forearms, that is. So it's not quite lengthen biased. You can still do some lengthen partials here, but I find that it just feels a little bit weird without having that added stability of something behind your elbow, especially as you get stronger on these. I've gotten pretty strong on incline dumbbell curls. They start to feel a little bit weird once you get to about 55 pounds. 50, yeah, I don't think I ever tried 60, but I was doing 55 for my working sets for like 8. And that's where it started to feel a little bit weird. If I'm putting my own subjective feeling into it. So obviously it's a dumbbell too, so it's a little bit less stable. There is back support, but there isn't elbow support. So I don't think you're quite getting maximum force production. So what I'm going to do here is put it high A tier. I have a hard time putting it as high as these preacher curl variations, but I think it's better than a Bayesian curl. I would say overall as a mass builder, it's better than the strict dumbbell curl, better than the alternating curl, better than the dumbbell and maybe not better than the dumbbell preacher curl. I might, if I'm going to rank these officially within the tier, I might do this. Yeah, that looks more appropriate. And these three they're pretty interchangeable. Yeah, these are just way too nitpicky to try and rank. So up next, we've got a seated machine curl. So this is the resistance profile is going to depend on the cam of the machine. So it does vary from machine to machine. But what I'm going to say with this is let's just assume it's a flat resistance profile. It's a great lift because there is going to be elbow support on the vast majority of these machines, if not all of them. The resistance profile is flat. So it's not going to make any specific part of the range of motion harder, except for where you are most weakest, which is usually going to be the contraction. But the good news is there is going to be tension at the bottom. Sometimes with these machines, the range of motion is limited since you can't just assume everyone can go all the way into full elbow lockout. So I do find that with these machines, I've only used a handful of them, but most of them start the range of motion probably right about here, which isn't that much of a deal breaker because it does have a lot of upsides, like the flat resistance profile, where even if you don't get a full extension, you at least get high tension when you're pretty much at a full extension. You get the stability of the elbow support. You get to sit down, and you can just pump so hard on these. You can push them so hard, and for that reason, I really do like this lift. These I would put up in A tier. These are going to be very comparable to just a strict dumbbell curl. It's a flat resistance profile. With this, you can do length and partials, so the differences are going to be fairly nitpicky. They're both obviously a very similar setup. I would put this just a tad above this lift here. It's a noticeable gap. I would say this is a little bit better. Um, but this isn't far behind. So it's kind of like these three, and then these three are like kind of the lower A tier, where the other tiers, I feel like everything's kind of interchangeable. And then last but not least, we've got chin ups. So chin ups, they obviously train a lot of elbow flexion, but there's one problem here. It's that your back is the prime mover. Your lats are going to be moving incredibly hard on this lift. They're absolutely the strongest muscles here. They're absolutely the prime mover. And while some people really can grow good biceps from chin ups, it's a very short biased lift. Your biceps are basically as short as they can possibly get right here, and then even all the way at the top, let's say they end right here, that's still a very short position. That's like basically spider curl position. Add that to there's not a whole ton of tension there. It's like if you're someone that's lucky enough to be able to grow your biceps properly from chin ups, awesome, like more power to you. But if you haven't grown your biceps yet, do not put all of your eggs in one basket being chin ups, because you might not be someone that responds to them. There's a lot of people, myself included, that have trained pull ups and chin ups a ton and gotten very, very strong on those movements and gotten big lats and big backs that had super underwhelming arms. The whole chin ups for biceps thing, it's very minimalist. I hate to say it, but it's kind of like a dated old school. It's the epitome of like an appeal to simplicity or an appeal to like masculinity. I find where people are just like, oh, you don't need all these gimmicks. Just be a tough guy and do these chin ups and you'll grow. It's like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with chin ups, but if we're talking about just biceps, like realistically here, it's just not a good lift for biceps. So for that reason, they have to go in D tier. And the cool thing about D tier is these lifts, except for the deadlifts, not gonna lie, these two lifts can grow your biceps all right, even in D tier. It's like I would never recommend them, but I don't know if you want to get some growth from there and you just want to enjoy your training and not take it seriously and enjoy either one of those movements. That's fine. I would never program them, but even in D tier, it's not the worst of the worst unless it just doesn't actually train your bicep like a conventional or deadlift variation of any kind. I hope this list was comprehensive and made sense. Hope you learned a lot. If you have any questions on any of these bicep lifts, feel free to hit me up in the comments. If you have any other tier lists you'd like to see after this, let me know. I'll pick the most upvoted one. Obviously, my personal bias for the next one is going to be triceps, not going to lie. But with that being said, that's all I got for today. So hope you enjoyed the tier list, and I will see you guys in the next video.